Jeff Carson built an empire on ambition, but the woman who built him never asked for a single stone from its foundation. The rain hammered against the converted garage windows like accusations, each drop a reminder that Jeff Carson's consulting firm existed on borrowed time and desperate hope. He sat hunched over a desk constructed from salvaged doors, surrounded by rejection letters that had become wallpaper for his failures. The potential client, who promised to change everything, had cancelled an hour ago, the third cancellation this month, and Jeff felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settling into his bones like winter cold. "You're doing that thing again?" Shannon Queen said from the doorway, her nurse's scrubs still wrinkled from a double shift that had stretched into dawn. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, the cheap kind they bought in bulk because luxury lived somewhere beyond their reality. But she had added cinnamon the way his mother used to, transforming necessity into comfort. What thing? Jeff didn't look up, afraid she would see the defeat in his eyes and finally understand what he had always suspected, that she had married a man who dreamed bigger than his capacity to deliver. "The thing where you forget you're brilliant." Shannon set the coffee down and moved behind him, her hands finding the knots in his shoulders with the precision of someone who had mapped every inch of his tension over years of late nights and early disappointments. "The thing where you measure yourself against people who were born holding what you're trying to build from nothing." Jeff reached back and caught her hand, pulling her around until she perched on the edge of his makeshift desk. Even exhausted from her shift, with her hair escaping its bun and shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of too many hours caring for others, she radiated something he could never name but recognized as the only thing keeping him tethered to possibility. "Shannon, I can't keep doing this to you. You work yourself to exhaustion, while I chase dreams that keep running faster than I can follow. Maybe it's time to accept that some people are meant to work for others, not build something of their own." She took his face in both hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Jeff Carson, I didn't marry potential. I didn't marry promises. I married you. The man who sees problems nobody else notices and creates solutions that don't exist yet. The man who rebuilt Mrs. Patterson's entire filing system for free because he couldn't stand watching her struggle. The man who taught himself everything he knows because nobody handed him instruction manuals for the life he wanted to live. That doesn't pay our rent. Neither does quitting." Shannon released his face but didn't move away. "You know what I did during my break tonight? I called every single client you've helped in the past 2 years, every single one. And I asked them to write down specifically how you changed their situation. Not vague compliments, actual details about what you fixed and how it impacted them." Jeff felt something shift in his chest. "Shannon, you can't—" "I already did." She pulled a folder from her bag, worn at the edges from being carried through her entire shift. 43 testimonials? 43 detailed accounts of how Jeff Carson saw what nobody else could see and built solutions from nothing. I organized them by category and impact. Tomorrow morning, you're going to send these to every potential client who thinks you're just another consultant trying to sell them services they don't need. He opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he read words he had never thought to collect. Mrs. Patterson, describing how his system saved her company from bankruptcy. Gerald Martinez explaining how Jeff's recommendations transformed his struggling restaurant into a neighborhood destination. Line after line of evidence that contradicted everything he believed about his own worth. "How did you have time to do this?" His voice emerged rough, barely controlled. "Because I believe in you, even when you forget how to believe in yourself." That's what love is, Jeff. Not the easy moments when everything works. The hard moments when someone needs to remember for both of you. Jeff pulled her close, burying his face against her shoulder, breathing in the hospital smell that clung to her scrubs mixed with the coconut oil she used in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Shannon said, her voice light but her arms tight around him. "But you're stuck with me anyway. Now stop feeling sorry for yourself and start making calls. Those testimonials won't send themselves, and we have rent due next week." The next morning, Jeff sent the folder to Hamilton and Associates, a mid-sized investment group that had expressed mild interest months ago but never followed through. He crafted an email that was neither desperate nor arrogant, simply presenting evidence of impact and inviting conversation. Then he returned to the work he could control, refining a proposal for a local non-profit that couldn't afford to pay him, but needed help desperately. Shannon found him still working when she returned from her day shift, and something in her expression made him look up sharply. "What happened?" "Hamilton and Associates called the hospital looking for me. They wanted to verify that I actually collected those testimonials, that you didn't fabricate them." Jeff's stomach dropped. "Shannon, I'm so sorry. I never meant to." "They want to meet with you tomorrow. Not a preliminary conversation, an actual meeting with their senior partners. They said anyone with a wife dedicated enough to document his impact from a hospital break room is someone they need to understand better." Jeff stood slowly, not quite believing what he was hearing. "They said that, word for word." Shannon crossed to him, taking both his hands. "Jeff, this is going to work, not because you're lucky or because someone finally noticed you, because you're genuinely good at what you do, and because you have someone who sees you clearly enough to show others what they're missing." That night, they celebrated on their apartment balcony, the same place where Shannon had held him through countless disappointments. They couldn't afford a restaurant, so Shannon had picked up takeout from the Chinese place that knew their order by heart. The containers sat between them, steam rising into the cool evening air, and for the first time in months, Jeff felt something that resembled hope taking root in soil that had been barren too long. "When we make it," Jeff said, chopsticks halfway to his mouth, "and I mean really make it, when we can afford more than this, I'm going to take you everywhere you've ever wanted to go. Paris, Tokyo, anywhere." Shannon smiled, that particular smile that always undid him. "Jeff, I don't need Paris, I need this. You and me and take out on our balcony, building something real. That's the dream. Everything else is just scenery." He leaned across their makeshift table and kissed her, tasting soy sauce and promise. "You're the architect of everything good in my life. You know that, right?" She kissed his forehead, her lips warm against his skin. "Architects only reveal what was already there, waiting to be built. I just helped you see your own blueprint." The meeting with Hamilton and Associates happened in a conference room that smelled of leather and old money. Jeff presented his approach with steady confidence, backed by evidence Shannon had helped him organize. The partners asked questions that actually listened to his answers, rather than waiting for their turn to speak. When they offered him a partnership contract at the end of the meeting, Jeff had to read the terms twice to believe they were real. He called Shannon from the parking lot, his voice breaking as he tried to explain what had just happened. She was in the middle of a shift, but took the call anyway, and he could hear the smile in her voice when she said, "See, I told you. You were already brilliant. You just needed someone to document it." "I love you," Jeff said, the words inadequate for what he felt, but the only ones available. "I know," Shannon replied. "Now come home so we can celebrate properly. And Jeff, this is just the beginning. Don't forget that when things get complicated." Her last sentence carried a weight he didn't understand until much later, after everything had already broken. Chapter 2. The Serpent Enters Paradise. Damien Howell entered Jeff's life like smoke, gradually, almost imperceptibly, until suddenly the air was thick with something that made breathing difficult. The partnership with Hamilton and Associates came with allies, but Damien was something else entirely. He was the man other men watched to learn which fork to use, which wine to order, which words would signal sophistication to people who measured worth in symbols Jeff was still learning to decode. Their first private dinner happened at a club where membership fees cost more than Jeff used to make in half a year. Damien had insisted, saying that understanding their world required immersion, not observation. Jeff arrived deliberately early, a habit from when being on time meant being late, and found himself alone in a dining room where even the silence sounded expensive. "Relax," Damien said when he finally arrived, his suit fitting him like it had been grown rather than tailored. "Nobody here is judging you. They're too busy making sure nobody is judging them." The conversation started professionally enough: market positioning, client relationships, expansion strategies. But somewhere between the appetizer and main course, Damien's tone shifted into something more personal, more deliberately intimate. "Can I ask you something without offense?" Damien's smile suggested the question was already decided, regardless of Jeff's answer. "Sure." "Your wife, Shannon, she seems lovely, very genuine." Jeff felt himself straighten slightly, instincts he didn't know he possessed suddenly alert. "She is, of course. I just noticed at the last gathering, and please understand, I mean no disrespect, she seemed a bit out of place. Not in a bad way, just different from the other partners' wives. More natural, less polished. Shannon works in healthcare. She doesn't have time for polish." Right. Damien sipped his wine, letting silence do work that words couldn't. "It's admirable, truly. But as you grow in this world, perception matters. The partners' spouses are part of the brand. They attend fundraisers, gallery openings, charity auctions. They represent us in spaces where deals get made at dinner parties rather than conference rooms." Jeff felt something cold settling in his stomach. "Shannon represents me perfectly." "I'm sure she does. On a personal level." Damien leaned forward slightly. "But we're not talking about personal anymore, are we? We're talking about trajectory, about the difference between successful and extraordinary. And extraordinary requires cultivation on every front." The conversation moved on, but the seed remained, embedded so carefully that Jeff couldn't quite identify when it had been planted. Over the following weeks, Damien orchestrated situations that watered that seed with precision. A corporate retreat, where other partners arrived with wives in designer clothing, while Shannon wore a simple sundress she had owned for years. A charity auction, where Shannon's genuine enthusiasm for the cause was misread as naivete by people who attended to be seen rather than to give. A gallery opening where Shannon studied the art with real interest, while others studied each other, and her authenticity became somehow embarrassing in a room designed for performance. Jeff began noticing things he had never seen before. How Shannon still clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, arranging them in careful stacks before grocery shopping. How she drove the same car she had driven when they first met, the one with the temperamental passenger door and the cassette player that no longer worked. How her laughter rang too loud in restaurants where other diners modulated their joy into acceptable volumes. One evening, Jeff came home to find Shannon repurposing gift wrap from a colleague's birthday present, carefully removing tape to preserve the paper for future use. She was humming while she worked, completely content in her economy, and Jeff felt something sharp twist in his chest. Not affection, but something closer to shame. "Shannon, we can afford new wrapping paper." She looked up, surprised by his tone. "I know, but this is still perfectly good." "Why waste it?" "Because we're not struggling anymore. Because saving wrapping paper makes us look like we're still living paycheck to paycheck." Shannon's hand stilled. "Who's looking, Jeff?" He couldn't answer that. Not honestly. Because the truth was that nobody was looking except him. And he was seeing her through eyes that Damien had carefully adjusted to measure worth in ways that had nothing to do with value. The distance between them grew in increments too small to name but large enough to feel. Jeff started scheduling breakfast meetings on Sunday mornings, the sacred time when Shannon made her grandmother's pancake recipe, the one that required standing at the stove for an hour because authentic flavor couldn't be rushed. He accepted invitations to dinners without consulting her, then suggested she stay home because the conversations would bore her, even though Shannon had never been bored by anything that involved human connection. When Shannon reached for his hand during a rare movie night, Jeff's fingers remained limp in her grasp. his attention fixed on messages from Damien about positioning and perception. He felt her hand slip away from his, felt the weight of her disappointment settling into the space between them on their couch. But he was too far inside his own transformation to reach back across the distance. Shannon tried everything she knew. She cooked his favorite meals, presenting them with care that transcended hunger. She planned a weekend getaway to the cabin where they had honeymooned, but Jeff cancelled at the last minute, citing a crisis that felt important until he realized later he couldn't remember what it had been. She attempted direct conversation, asking him with heartbreaking simplicity what had changed and whether they could repair it together. "Nothing's changed," Jeff said, the lie bitter in his mouth. "I'm just stressed. Building something this significant requires sacrifice." "Sacrifice," Shannon repeated slowly, testing the word. "Is that what I've become? A sacrifice? Don't be dramatic." She flinched as though he had struck her, and maybe he had. Words could wound more precisely than hands, finding soft places that fists would miss. The breaking point arrived after a particularly brutal week, when Damien manufactured a crisis that required Jeff's immediate attention. Their wedding anniversary. Shannon had marked it on the calendar with a heart, a gesture so simple and hopeful that Jeff felt sick when he noticed it while grabbing his keys to leave. She had made reservations at the restaurant where he had proposed, the one that wasn't fancy but served food that tasted like celebration. Jeff called her from the car to cancel. His voice clipped and impatient, as though she was the problem rather than his choice. Shannon said nothing for a long moment, and then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, "Okay. Just okay. Nothing else." And somehow that single word carried more weight than any argument could have held. He arrived home past midnight, bourbon sharp on his breath from drinks he hadn't wanted, but had consumed anyway because Damien kept ordering rounds. The apartment was dark, except for candles that had burned down to stubs. Their wax pooled on the table where Shannon had set 2 places. She sat at the table still, wearing her best dress, the blue one that made her eyes look impossibly bright. The food had grown cold hours ago. "You waited," Jeff said stupidly, his tongue thick with alcohol and guilt. "I always wait for you." Shannon's voice was steady, but tears tracked slowly down her face. "That's what I do. I wait, and I hope and I believe that the man I married is still in there somewhere, remembering what we built together." "Shannon, I had a work crisis. I told you that. You told me a lot of things. That I was your foundation. That you couldn't build anything without me. That my love was the only currency that mattered." She stood slowly, her movements careful, as though she might shatter if she moved too quickly. "Do you even remember what today is?" "Of course I remember," but his hesitation betrayed him. "Our anniversary. The day you promised to choose me every day for the rest of your life. And you chose a work crisis instead. A crisis that somehow ended with bourbon on your breath and my dinner cold on the table. I'm building something. Important. You're destroying something. Irreplaceable." Shannon's voice broke finally, and Jeff realized he had been waiting for this, for her to match his cruelty with her own, to give him permission to justify his transformation. But she didn't offer him that escape. Instead, she asked a question that cut deeper than any accusation. "Who told you I wasn't enough?" "Nobody told me anything." "Then why do you look at me now like I'm something you're embarrassed to be seen with? Why do you flinch when I laugh too loud? Why do you suggest I stay home when before you wanted me beside you always?" Jeff felt rage rising, hot and irrational, the kind that arrives when someone speaks truth you're desperate to deny. "You wouldn't understand the world I'm trying to build. You're too focused on saving wrapping paper and clipping coupons to see what's actually possible." "The world you're trying to build." Shannon's voice went flat, all emotion draining from it like blood from a wound. "Listen to yourself. It used to be our world, our future, our dreams. When did I get edited out of your vision? When you stopped being able to fit into it?" The words escaped before Jeff could stop them, sharp and deliberate, designed to wound in ways he would spend years trying to forgive himself for delivering. Shannon stood motionless, absorbing the impact. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but absolutely steady. "Then I guess we're done here." She walked to their bedroom without another word, her dignity intact, even as Jeff had stripped away everything else. He stood alone in their dining room, surrounded by the ruins of an anniversary that would never be recovered, understanding on some level that he had just destroyed the only thing that ever truly mattered. But understanding came too late. It always does. Chapter 3. The Fracture. Jeff woke the next morning to silence that felt wrong. Not the comfortable quiet of Shannon sleeping beside him, but the empty quiet of absence. He reached across the bed, his hand finding nothing but sheets that had grown cold. The panic arrived slowly at first, then all at once, flooding his system with clarity that bourbon had prevented the night before. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed, moving through her morning routine with mechanical precision. Coffee brewing, lunch packed for her shift, hair pulled back in the tight bun she wore to work. But something fundamental had changed. She moved around him rather than toward him, creating distance where before there had always been gravitational pull between their bodies. Shannon. Her name felt heavy in his mouth, weighted with everything he couldn't take back. "Your breakfast is on the counter. I'm working a double today." Her tone was professionally pleasant, the voice she used with difficult patients who needed care despite their hostility. "Can we talk about last night?" "What's there to talk about? You told me exactly where I fit in your new world." "I appreciate the clarity." She poured coffee into her travel mug, still not meeting his eyes. "I was drunk. I said things I didn't mean." "No." Shannon finally looked at him, and Jeff saw something that terrified him. Not anger, but acceptance. "You said things you've been thinking but were too careful to say out loud. Drunk words, sober thoughts. Isn't that what people say?" "Shannon, please, I need to go. I'm already late." She picked up her bag, her keys, everything she needed to exist outside their home. At the door, she paused without turning back. "I've loved you since I knew what love meant, Jeff. But I can't keep loving someone who's ashamed of me. That's not love anymore. That's just self-destruction for both of us." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like finality. Jeff went to work that day, but work felt like performance. Damien found him in his office, closing the door with casual familiarity that had become routine. "You look terrible," Damien observed, settling into the chair across from Jeff's desk. "Shannon and I had a fight." "Ah." Damien's expression suggested sympathy, but his eyes held something else. Satisfaction, maybe, or vindication. Marriage is complex, especially when one partner is evolving faster than the other. "Don't," Jeff said sharply. "Don't analyze my marriage. I'm not analyzing anything, just observing what you're clearly feeling. You're outgrowing your current situation. That's natural. Uncomfortable, but natural." Jeff wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because wasn't that exactly what he had been feeling? That Shannon represented a version of himself he was trying to leave behind. That her simplicity, her contentment with small pleasures, somehow limited what he could become. The following weeks dissolved into patterns of polite distance. Shannon worked her shifts and came home exhausted. Jeff attended dinners and meetings that stretched later each night. They existed in the same physical space, but occupied entirely different emotional territories. When Shannon spoke, Jeff heard her words, but filtered them through Damien's observations about evolution and trajectory. When Jeff spoke, Shannon listened with the patient attention she gave everyone, but responded with increasing brevity, as though conserving energy for battles worth fighting. Sunday mornings stopped including pancakes. Shannon woke early and went for long walks instead, returning when breakfast time had passed. Jeff told himself he didn't mind, that he preferred his new routine of protein shakes and business podcasts. But some part of him mourned the ritual loss, while another part insisted that mourning was weakness. Damien introduced Jeff to new circles, people who spoke in references Jeff had to research later, who attended events where tickets cost more than furniture. who measured success in visibility rather than impact. Jeff found himself learning a new language, one where sincerity was naive and calculation was sophistication. He practiced this language at home without meaning to, testing phrases that made Shannon's expression close like shutters over windows. One evening, Jeff came home to find Shannon sitting on their balcony, the place where they had celebrated every small victory. She was holding a photo album, the physical kind they had created together before everything became digital, and her face was wet with tears she didn't bother hiding. "What's wrong?" Jeff asked, though he knew. Everything was wrong. Do you remember this? Shannon held up a photo from their wedding day. They were cutting the cake, but neither of them was looking at the camera. They were looking at each other with expressions of such pure joy that it hurt to see now. "Of course I remember." "Do you remember what you said to me that night, after everyone left and we were alone?" Jeff tried to recall, but the memory felt distant, overlaid with so many other moments that the specific words escaped him. "You said that nothing would ever matter more than us. That you could lose everything else and survive as long as you had me. That I was your home, and everything else was just buildings." Shannon closed the album carefully. "When did that change, Jeff? When did I become just another building?" "You're twisting my words." "I'm not twisting anything. I'm just trying to understand how we got from there to here. How we went from promising forever to you, looking at me like I'm an obligation you're trying to shed with minimal social awkwardness. That's not fair." "No, it's not. None of this is fair. But it's honest, which is more than you've been with me in months." Shannon stood, leaving the photo album on the chair. "I'm going to stay with Tanya for a few days. Give us both space to figure out what we actually want." "Shannon, running away won't solve anything." "I'm not running away. I'm protecting myself from someone who's slowly convincing me I'm not worth protecting." She moved past him, her shoulder brushing his arm, and the brief contact felt like goodbye. "When you figure out who you want to be, the man I married or the man you're trying to become, call me. Until then, I need distance from watching you disappear." She packed a bag while Jeff stood useless in their bedroom doorway, trying to find words that would stop this, but coming up empty. She took only essentials, moving with efficiency that suggested she had thought this through carefully. At the door, she turned back one final time. "I love you, Jeff. I love the man you were and the man you could still be. But I can't love you enough for both of us. You have to love yourself and me enough to remember what actually matters." Then she was gone, and Jeff was alone in an apartment that suddenly felt cavernous without her presence to fill it. He told himself she would come back, that this was just a dramatic gesture, a way of making him pay attention. But days passed without contact, and Jeff found himself moving through their home, touching things Shannon had touched. Her coffee mug still on the counter, her bookmark still holding a place in a novel she hadn't finished, her sweater draped over the back of the couch like she had just taken it off. Damien noticed Jeff's distraction and pulled him aside after a meeting. "She still hasn't come back." "How did you know?" "You have the look of someone who's lost something and isn't sure whether to search or let it stay lost." Damien's tone was sympathetic, but his words carried an edge. "Maybe this is good. Clean break. Start fresh with someone who fits your current trajectory." Jeff felt anger spike sharp and sudden. "She's not a business strategy. She's my wife. Then act like it. Go get her. Apologize. Beg if you have to." Damien's expression shifted to something harder. "But if you're not willing to do that, then stop pretending you want her back and actually move forward." The words landed like a challenge, and Jeff realized with sickening clarity that he didn't know which option he wanted. Part of him missed Shannon desperately, ached for her presence and her certainty and her ability to make their small apartment feel like enough. But another part, the part that Damien had cultivated so carefully, whispered that missing her was different from wanting her back. That nostalgia was just fear of change dressed up as love. Jeff reached for his phone a dozen times that week, pulling up Shannon's contact, his thumb hovering over her name. But he never completed the call. Because what would he say? That he was sorry, but couldn't promise not to hurt her again. That he loved her, but wasn't sure he wanted the life that loving her required. So he said nothing, and silence became its own answer. Shannon returned after a week to collect more clothes, arriving when she knew Jeff would be at work. He came home to find closet space where her clothes had hung, bathroom counter space where her products had lived, absence where presence used to be. She left a note on the kitchen counter, brief and devastating. "I'll come for the rest when we've both had time to think. I need you to figure out what you want, without me in the room watching you decide." Jeff called her that night, breaking his own silence, but she didn't answer. He left a voicemail that rambled and circled, but never quite said anything meaningful. She texted back hours later, "Not yet. I'm not ready yet." He wanted to know when she would be ready, but couldn't ask, because he wasn't sure he was ready either. Ready for what? To choose? To admit what he was becoming? To acknowledge that Damien's poison had worked precisely because it told him things he wanted to hear? Weeks collapsed into each other, time losing structure without Shannon's routines to mark its passage. Jeff threw himself into work with desperate intensity, as though accumulating success could fill the space Shannon's absence created. Damien approved, praising Jeff's newfound focus, his willingness to prioritize growth over comfort. But late at night, alone in their apartment, Jeff would find himself standing in doorways of rooms Shannon had occupied, remembering how she moved through space like she belonged everywhere because she carried home inside herself. He would stand in their bedroom remembering how she slept, curled toward him even in her deepest dreams. He would stand in their kitchen remembering her humming while she cooked, transforming ordinary ingredients into meals that tasted like love. And standing there in the dark, Jeff would feel the first tremors of understanding that he had made a terrible mistake. Not a simple mistake that apologies could fix, but the kind that breaks foundations. The kind that changes you into someone you don't recognize when you finally stop running long enough to look in a mirror. But understanding didn't translate to action. Not yet. Because action required admitting failure, and Jeff had spent months learning to associate success with ruthlessness, growth with leaving things behind. So he stood in doorways, and Shannon stayed away, and the distance between them stretched until it felt impassable. The breaking point arrived on what would have been their anniversary, the next one, a full year after the disaster that had started their unraveling. Jeff came home late from another dinner that meant nothing and found the photo album still sitting on their balcony chair where Shannon had left it months ago. Rain had damaged some pages, blurring their younger faces, bleeding their captured joy into watercolor abstractions. Jeff opened the album carefully, looking at what remained. The wedding photo was ruined, their faces barely visible, but underneath it, protected by the photo above, was their honeymoon picture. They were sitting on a beach at sunset, and Shannon was laughing at something he had said, her head thrown back, her joy absolute. And Jeff in the photo was looking at her with an expression of such complete adoration that he barely recognized himself. Who was that man? And how had he become someone that man would be ashamed to know? Jeff closed the album and finally understood what he had to do. Not apologize. Apologies were inadequate for what he had destroyed. Not beg. Shannon deserved more than his desperation. He had to change fundamentally or let her go completely. And change required first admitting what he had become. He picked up his phone and called Damien. When he answered, Jeff said simply, "We're done. Whatever you've been doing, whatever game you've been playing with my life, it's finished." "Jeff, you're being irrational." "No. For the first time in months, I'm being completely rational. You poison my marriage because that's what you do. You find people's insecurities and water them until they grow into something that consumes everything healthy around them. And I let you. I'm not blaming you for my choices, but I'm done making choices that benefit you while destroying me." He hung up before Damien could respond. Then he sat on his balcony, holding a damaged photo album, and understood with absolute clarity that he had lost Shannon. Not might lose her, had lost her. Past tense, completed action. The question wasn't whether he could get her back. The question was whether he could become someone worthy of the love she had offered before he had systematically destroyed it. And that answer would take longer than one night to discover. Chapter 4. The Gift That Destroys. Shannon moved through the apartment in pre-dawn darkness, her movements practiced and deliberate. She had been planning this departure for weeks, ever since clarity arrived like cold water, shocking her into understanding that staying was no longer self-sacrifice. It was self-destruction. Love could not live on memory alone. Eventually, memory ran out, leaving only the hollow space where connection used to exist. She packed methodically, taking only what she needed to survive: clothes, toiletries, documents that proved her existence. She left behind every gift Jeff had ever given her, arranging them on his dresser like evidence in a case she no longer needed to argue. The necklace he bought for their first anniversary. The book of poetry he had inscribed with words that once made her cry with joy. The framed photo from their honeymoon that used to sit on her nightstand. Each item represented a version of them that no longer existed, and carrying them forward felt like hauling corpses into a future that needed to be lighter. The wooden box sat on the kitchen table, waiting. Shannon had found it at an estate sale years ago, drawn to its simplicity and the way its hinges whispered when opened. She had kept it empty, waiting for the right purpose. Now she understood what it had been waiting for, a funeral for love that died by degrees rather than dramatic ending. She arranged items inside with archaeological care. The movie stub from their first date. He had taken her to see a film she had already seen because she wanted to watch him experience it fresh. The notes he used to hide in her lunch bag when they were newlyweds. Small declarations written on whatever paper was nearby. A napkin where he had sketched their dream house during a conversation about the family they would build. Their wedding invitation, which she had kept even though most people discarded theirs, because his handwritten addition on the back, "I get to marry you today. I get to marry you," had felt like a promise worth preserving. She placed her wedding ring in the center of these artifacts, the gold catching early light coming through the window. The ring felt heavier than it should, as though it had absorbed all the weight of their deterioration. She had worn it every day since he slipped it on her finger, even after everything started breaking, because removing it felt like admitting defeat. But defeat had already happened. Keeping the ring on now was just refusing to acknowledge what everyone else could see. The letter she had written and rewritten sat folded beneath everything else. She had wanted to be cruel, to wound him the way he had wounded her, to make him understand through pain what he had refused to understand through love. But cruelty required energy she no longer possessed. Instead, she had written truth without decoration. "Jeff, I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because I love myself enough to stop letting you destroy me. You became someone I don't recognize, and I'm terrified that if I stay, I'll become someone I don't recognize either. The man I married would never have looked at me like I was an embarrassment. The man I married would never have valued other people's opinions over our connection. I don't know where that man went, but I can't keep searching for him while you're actively burying him deeper. This box holds everything we built together. Maybe someday you'll open it and remember who we were before you decided we weren't enough. I hope you do. Not for me, for you. Because the life you're building on our ruins won't bring you what you think it will. Success without love is just expensive loneliness. I know you won't believe me until you experience it yourself. But maybe, when you're sitting alone in whatever penthouse you think will make you happy, you'll remember the woman who loved you when you had nothing but dreams and determination. I'll remember that man forever. He was worth loving. I hope he's still in there somewhere." Shannon sealed the box and placed it in the center of the kitchen table where Jeff would find it immediately. She stood looking at it for a long moment. this small container of everything that mattered, and felt tears finally break free from the control she had maintained for months. She didn't sob. She cried quietly, tears tracking down her face while her body remained still, as though even her grief knew better than to demand attention. She left before dawn broke completely, driving away from the apartment they had chosen together, the neighborhood where they had planned to raise children, the life that had once felt inevitable. She didn't look back. Looking back was how people turned into pillars of salt, frozen between what was and what could never be again. Jeff discovered the box at noon when he finally emerged from their bedroom, his head pounding from another night of drinking that solved nothing but at least temporarily erased the constant awareness of his own failure. He saw the box immediately, sitting in the center of the kitchen table like an accusation. For a long moment, he stood staring at it, afraid to approach because he knew what it represented even before opening it. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid, and the first item he saw was her wedding ring. The sight of it hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs, because a wedding ring on a table instead of a finger was its own language, one that needed no translation. He picked up the ring carefully, as though it might shatter under his touch, and noticed how warm it still felt. She must have worn it until the very last moment before placing it in the box. The thought of her standing in their kitchen, pulling the ring from her finger, facing the finality of that gesture alone, it destroyed something in him that had somehow remained intact through all the previous destruction. The movie stub. Jeff remembered that night with painful clarity. Shannon had already seen the film, but never mentioned it, wanting him to experience it without her spoilers influencing his reaction. He had discovered the truth months later when they were talking about favorite movies, and she mentioned loving that particular film. "But you seemed so surprised during the plot twist," he had said, confused. She had smiled that smile that made his chest hurt. "I wasn't watching the movie. I was watching you watch the movie. That was better than seeing it for the first time," the notes he used to write. Jeff picked one up, reading his own handwriting from years ago. "Thinking about you is my favorite distraction. Also, my most productive because you make me want to be someone worthy of your thoughts. Love you always, Jay." When had he stopped leaving her notes? When had expressing love become something he forgot to do? The napkin sketch. They had been at a diner, eating breakfast for dinner, because Shannon had just finished a night shift, and Jeff had been working on a proposal that was going nowhere. "Where do you see us in 10 years? She had asked, exhausted but content. Jeff had grabbed a napkin and started sketching. A house with a big kitchen, a yard for kids who didn't exist yet, a porch where they would sit together watching those kids play. "Here," he had said, pushing the napkin toward her. "Exactly here. Everything else is just steps toward this." The wedding invitation. Jeff unfolded it carefully, finding his own handwriting on the back. "I get to marry you today. I get to marry you." He had written that the morning of their wedding while getting dressed, so overwhelmed with gratitude that she had chosen him that he needed to document the feeling somewhere. His best man had found him sitting on the floor, staring at the invitation, tears streaming down his face. "You okay, man?" he had asked. Jeff had laughed. "I've never been better. I'm marrying Shannon. I'm actually marrying Shannon." How had that man, the one who cried with gratitude on his wedding day, become someone who made Shannon feel like she needed to leave to preserve herself? The letter waited beneath everything else. Jeff read it 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of pain he had inflicted. Success without love is just expensive loneliness. The phrase hit him hardest because he was already experiencing its truth. He had more money now than when they started, better prospects, higher status in circles that had previously ignored him. But every achievement felt hollow because Shannon wasn't there to celebrate with him. Every success tasted like failure because the one person whose opinion mattered had been systematically trained to believe her opinion was worthless. Jeff found himself on his knees on their kitchen floor, The box clutched against his chest, making sounds he didn't recognize as his own voice. Grief poured out of him like poison being extracted raw and unfiltered, and he couldn't stop it. Didn't want to stop it, because maybe if he hurt enough, if he bled out all the arrogance and stupidity and cruel ambition that had infected him, maybe then he could find his way back to the man Shannon had loved. But even as he cried, holding evidence of what he had destroyed, Jeff understood that tears changed nothing. Shannon was gone. Past tense. Completed action. And all the crying in the world wouldn't bring her back. The question wasn't whether he had lost her. He had. The question was whether he could become someone worthy of being mourned. Because right now, holding a wooden box of memories, Jeff wasn't sure he was even worth that. Chapter 5. The Search That Yields Nothing. Jeff started his search before he had fully processed Shannon's departure, driven by panic rather than plan. He moved through their apartment like a crime scene investigator, searching for clues she might have left about her destination. But Shannon had been thorough. Her phone number went straight to a disconnection message. Her social media accounts, never heavily used, had been deactivated completely. She had removed herself from his life with surgical precision, leaving no threads he could follow. The hospital where Shannon worked had become Jeff's first destination. He drove there with irrational hope that she might still be working her shifts, that her resignation had been a threat rather than reality. The supervisor at the nurses' station recognized him immediately, her expression hardening. Shannon doesn't work here anymore. She submitted her resignation weeks ago. Weeks? Jeff felt the ground shift beneath him. How many weeks? To 5. She gave us proper notice, worked her remaining shifts professionally, and left without drama. The supervisor's tone made clear that Jeff fell into the drama category. She asked us not to share her forwarding information with anyone, and we're honoring that request. I'm her husband. She mentioned that. She was very specific that anyone, included you especially. Jeff drove away from the hospital, understanding that Shannon had been planning this departure for over a month, working her final shifts while coming home to an apartment where he barely noticed her presence. How had he missed the signs? Or had he simply not cared enough to look? Tanya's house was his next stop. Shannon's best friend since childhood, the woman who had stood beside Shannon at their wedding and whispered to Jeff during the ceremony, "You hurt her, and I'll destroy you." He had laughed then, assuming it was the kind of protective threat friends make without meaning. Now, standing on Tanya's porch, he understood she had meant every word. Tanya opened the door before he could knock, her expression pure contempt. "What do you want, Jeff?" "I need to know where Shannon is. I need to talk to her." No, the single word landed flat and final. "Tanya, please. I know I messed up, but I need to make this right." "You don't get to decide when things get made right. That's not your call anymore." Tanya stepped onto her porch, closing the door behind her. "Shannon made me promise not to tell you where she went. That promise is the last gift I can give her after watching you systematically break her heart for months. I love her. You love the idea of her. You love having someone worship you unconditionally. But you don't love her enough to actually see her. If you did, you never would have let that poisonous friend of yours convince you she wasn't enough. Damien's gone. I cut him off completely. Good for you. Want a medal for finally doing the bare minimum?" Tanya's voice carried years of suppressed fury. "Jeff, I watched Shannon cry herself sick over you. I watched her try everything she knew to reach you. I watched her make herself smaller and quieter and less, hoping that would somehow be enough to make you remember why you married her. And through all of that, you just kept pulling further away. Too busy becoming someone important to notice you were destroying the only important thing you ever had. Tell me where she is. Please." "No. She needs space from you. She needs time to remember who she is, without you constantly making her question her worth. And honestly, You need time to figure out if you're actually capable of change or if you're just scared of being alone. Jeff tried arguing, then pleading, then something close to begging. But Tanya remained immovable, her loyalty to Shannon absolute. Finally, she delivered the blow that sent him away. Shannon asked me to tell you something if you came looking. She said to tell you that she loves you enough to let you go, that she hopes you build whatever life you think will make you happy, and that if you ever become the man she thought you were, she'll be genuinely glad for you, even if she's not there to see it. Jeff left Tanya's house, understanding that Shannon had said goodbye to him long before she actually left. She had mourned their marriage, while he was too busy building his empire to notice. The private investigator was a last resort, an expensive mistake Jeff paid for anyway, because action felt better than helplessness. The investigator traced Shannon's movements to a bus station and then nothing. She had paid cash for her ticket, used no credit cards afterward, left no digital footprint for technology to follow. Whoever she is, she knows how to disappear, the investigator said, admiration creeping into his professional tone. Most people leave trails everywhere. She left nothing. Jeff's final hope was Shannon's mother in Philadelphia. He drove there on a Sunday, arriving unannounced because announced visits would have been refused. The house looked exactly as he remembered. Neat garden, painted shutters, the kind of home that radiated care in every detail. Shannon had grown up here, learning from her mother how to build beauty from limited resources. Shannon's mother answered the door, and her expression, disappointment rather than anger, hurt worse than Tanya's rage had. Jeff. Mrs. Queen, I'm looking for Shannon. I know she's been in contact with you. She called once, told me she was safe and needed time. That's all I know. She started closing the door, but Jeff caught it. Please, I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm asking anyway. You're right. You don't deserve help. You don't deserve Shannon. You don't deserve the years she spent building you up while you were planning how to tear her down. Mrs. Queen's voice remained level, but her words cut precisely. My daughter loved you with everything she had. She sacrificed her own comfort, worked herself to exhaustion, believed in you when you had nothing but dreams and debt. And the moment you got what you wanted, you decided she was somehow less than the people with money and status. You traded something real for something hollow, and now you want her back because you're learning that hollow things echo with your own emptiness. I know I was wrong. Knowing and changing are different things. Shannon called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said you looked at her like she embarrassed you, that you suggested she stay home from events because she didn't fit your new image, that you cancelled your anniversary to attend a work dinner that probably meant nothing. Mrs. Queen's voice finally broke slightly. Do you know what that does to a woman who gave you everything? Who believed you when you said she was your foundation? It doesn't just hurt her. It makes her question whether she was ever worth loving in the first place. That's not I never meant. What you meant doesn't matter. What you did matters. And what you did was trade the only authentic thing in your life for a performance that will eventually collapse because you're building on nothing. She pulled her door free from his grip. If Shannon contacts me again, I won't tell her you came looking. That's not cruelty. That's protection. She needs to heal without you picking at her wounds, and you need to figure out who you are, without her there to remind you of who you could be. The door closed, with finality that echoed the sound of Shannon closing their apartment door months ago. Jeff drove back toward his empty apartment, stopping at a rest area halfway home because he couldn't see the road through tears that kept overwhelming him. He sat in his car in a parking lot full of strangers, crying the way he hadn't cried since childhood, the kind of crying that comes from places too deep for adult control to reach. A truck driver knocked on his window, concern evident. You okay, man? No, Jeff wiped his face uselessly. I lost everything that mattered and I can't find my way back. The driver nodded slowly. Sometimes lost is where we need to be for a while. Gives us time to figure out why we got lost in the first place. He handed Jeff a napkin through the window. Whatever you lost, if it was worth having, it's worth fighting for. But fighting doesn't mean chasing. Sometimes it means stopping, looking at yourself honest, and fixing what's broken before you go looking for what left. The truck driver walked away, leaving Jeff holding a napkin and wisdom from a stranger that felt more honest than anything he had heard in months. Jeff returned to his apartment as darkness settled. Shannon's absence occupied every room, filling space in ways her presence never had, because presence was natural, but absence was violent. He moved from room to room, touching things Shannon had touched. Her coffee mug, still on the counter where she had left it that last morning. Her bookmark, still holding a place in a novel she would never finish here. Her sweater, draped over the couch back like she had just removed it. He picked up the sweater and held it to his face, breathing in the fading scent of her, coconut oil and hospital antiseptic, and something underneath that was purely Shannon. The smell was disappearing like everything else, fading with each day that passed, and Jeff understood that eventually even her scent would be gone. Eventually, the apartment would forget she had ever lived here. Eventually, only he would remember, and even his memory would distort with time until he couldn't trust whether he was remembering her accurately or just remembering his memory of her. Jeff sat in their bedroom, his bedroom now, holding Shannon's sweater, and understood that he had become a man haunted by his own choices. Not haunted by her, Shannon had left with dignity and grace. Haunted by himself, by the person he had allowed himself to become, by the casual cruelty he had inflicted on someone whose only crime was loving him completely. The wooden box sat on his nightstand, always within reach, because letting it out of his sight felt like losing her twice. He opened it again, reading her letter again, absorbing pain that never diminished no matter how many times he revisited it. Success without love is just expensive loneliness. Jeff was learning exactly how expensive loneliness could be, and the price kept rising. Chapter 6. The Empire Built on Ashes. Jeff arrived at his office the morning after returning from Philadelphia to find Damien holding court in the conference room. Through the glass walls, Jeff watched him gesturing expansively to the other partners, clearly mid-story, clearly the center of attention he always positioned himself to be. Something inside Jeff broke cleanly, the way glass breaks when struck at precisely the right angle, sudden, sharp, irreversible. He entered the conference room without knocking, interrupting whatever performance Damien was delivering. "We need to talk. Everyone else, get out." The other partners glanced at Damien, waiting for his permission, which told Jeff everything he needed to know about how power had redistributed during his absence. When Damien nodded, they filed out quickly, leaving the two men alone. "Jeff, you look terrible. Maybe you should take some personal time? You poisoned my marriage." Jeff's voice was steady, calm, which made the accusation more threatening than shouting would have. "You systematically destroyed the most important relationship in my life, because that's what you do. You find people's insecurities and water them until they consume everything healthy around them. That's an interesting interpretation of friendship." Damien's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes had gone cold. "I offered you guidance, perspective. You made your own choices." "You're right. I did. And that's on me. But you orchestrated situations specifically designed to make Shannon look inadequate. You commented on her clothes, her car, her simplicity. You suggested she didn't fit into the world we were building, that she held me back from my potential. You were subtle about it, I'll give you that. But you were deliberate. People show you who they are, Jeff. I didn't create your dissatisfaction with Shannon. I just pointed out what you were already feeling. You're like a doctor who infects patients and then charges them for the cure." Jeff stepped closer, and Damien actually backed up slightly. "The difference is, I'm not paying anymore. I'm done. With you, with your manipulation, with whatever game you're playing where other people's lives are your entertainment. You're making a mistake. Walking away from me means walking away from opportunities I've created for you. Good. If those opportunities require me to be someone who destroys his own wife, I don't want them. Jeff moved toward the door, then turned back. I'm withdrawing from every project we're jointly invested in. I'll take the financial hit. Consider it payment for the education you gave me about what matters and what's just expensive noise. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is not doing this. Months ago, when Shannon still believed I was worth saving, Jeff spent the next week systematically disentangling himself from Damien's influence. He withdrew from 3 major projects, accepting significant losses because clean breaks required sacrifice. The other partners watched, with expressions ranging from confusion to contempt, but Jeff no longer cared about their opinions. Their opinions were the problem. He had spent months valuing the approval of people who measured worth in portfolio size and social positioning, people who would never attend his funeral except to network. The business he had built started crumbling, but Jeff let it crumble. He downsized deliberately, moving his operation into a smaller office that cost less and required fewer compromises. He returned to serving clients who needed actual help rather than status symbols. He remembered why he had started this work in the first place, not to build an empire, but to solve problems that mattered to people trying to build better lives. His apartment lease ended, and Jeff moved into something smaller, more modest, similar to the place he had shared with Shannon. He furnished it minimally: bed, table, chair, the essentials and nothing more. No decoration, because decoration felt like lying, pretending he had created a home, when really he had just created a space to exist between sleeping and working. His days lost their previous structure. He forgot to eat regular meals, surviving on coffee and whatever required minimum effort. He attended therapy sessions his doctor recommended, sitting across from a patient woman who listened to him describe his failures with clinical attention. "You're grieving," she observed during their 3rd session. "I know that, but you're grieving someone who's still alive. That's more complicated than typical grief because there's this persistent sense that you could fix it if you just found the right words or made the right gesture. But I can't fix it. No, you can't. Shannon needs space to heal, and you need space to become someone different from who you were. Those processes don't happen simultaneously in the same room. So I just accept that she's gone. You accept that the version of your relationship that existed is gone. Whether something new could eventually exist, that's unknown. But you can't build new while you're still clinging to old." Jeff attended his sessions faithfully because they were the only place where someone listened without judgment to the full catalogue of his failures. Everywhere else, people either pitied him or dismissed him, neither of which helped. But his therapist simply witnessed his pain without trying to fix it, and that witness felt like the only honest interaction he had anymore. Months passed. Jeff existed rather than lived, maintaining a practice just large enough to pay his bills and fill his time. He stopped checking his bank account because the numbers no longer mattered. He stopped attending social events because performing enjoyment felt exhausting. He stopped pretending he was okay because who was he pretending for? The anniversary of Shannon's departure arrived without warning. Jeff woke that morning feeling like he had been beaten, his body aching with emotional weight that had somehow manifested physically. He drove to the restaurant where they used to celebrate small victories, the place where Shannon would order his favorite dessert, even when she was too full, because seeing him enjoy it made her happy. He sat alone at a table for 2 and ordered Shannon's favorite meal. When it arrived, he placed it across from his empty plate and sat staring at food growing cold, remembering how she used to steal bites from his plate, even though she insisted she wasn't hungry. "Just tasting," she would say, her fork already moving toward his food again. "Quality control." The server approached carefully. "Sir, is someone joining you?" "No, she's not coming." Jeff pulled out his wallet, leaving enough to cover both meals and a generous tip. "She's never coming." He left the food untouched on the table, walking out into evening air that felt too heavy to breathe. 2 years. He had lost Shannon 2 years ago, and the loss felt as fresh as the day she left. Time was supposed to heal, wasn't it? But time was just teaching him to live with permanent absence. Which wasn't healing, it was just learning to function while broken. Jeff returned to his apartment and opened the wooden box for the 100th time, maybe the 1,000th. He read Shannon's letter again, his eyes finding the same phrases they always found. I love myself enough to stop letting you destroy me. Success without love is just expensive loneliness. Maybe when you're sitting alone in whatever penthouse you think will make you happy, you'll remember the woman who loved you when you had nothing but dreams. He wasn't in a penthouse. He was in a modest apartment, sitting on a second-hand couch, holding artifacts from a love he had systematically murdered. And he did remember. He remembered everything. That was the problem. Memory without possibility of reconciliation was just torture. Jeff closed the box carefully and sat in darkness, understanding that he had built an empire on ashes. Not a real empire. Real empires required foundation. He had built a performance that collapsed the moment he stopped performing. And underneath the rubble was just him alone, learning what Shannon had tried to tell him before he drove her away. That success without love wasn't success at all. It was just expensive loneliness. And expensive loneliness was the most expensive thing Jeff had ever purchased. Chapter 7. The Thread of Hope. Time moved differently now for Jeff. Days no longer had names. They were just units of survival between sleeping and waking. He had settled into routines that kept him functional. Work enough to pay rent, eat enough to not collapse, exist enough to not raise concern among the few people who still checked on him. Tanya appeared at his door on a Tuesday evening without warning. Jeff answered, expecting a delivery driver, and found instead Shannon's best friend, her expression complex in ways he couldn't decode. "Can I come in?" "Of course." Jeff stepped aside, suddenly aware of how bare his apartment was, how it looked like someone had just moved in or was preparing to move out. "Do you want coffee or—" "I'm not staying long." Tanya remained standing, her posture defensive. "I need to say something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." "Okay, I don't forgive you. I want that clear from the start. What you did to Shannon was cruel and deliberate, and watching her recover from it has been one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed." Tanya's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. "But 6 months ago, Shannon's mother died. Suddenly, heart failure. And Shannon had to grieve alone, because she'd cut herself off from everyone who reminded her of you, and that included most of the people she loved." Jeff felt his chest constrict. "I didn't know. Nobody told me. Nobody knew how to reach you. You disappeared into whatever hole you've been living in. But that's not why I'm here." Tanya took a breath. "I've been wrestling with this decision for months. Whether to tell you what I'm about to tell you goes against every protective instinct I have for Shannon. But I watched her at her mother's funeral alone, and I thought about how grief compounds itself when you're isolated. How loss piles on loss until you can't remember what it feels like to not be drowning." "Tanya, what are you trying to say?" "Years ago, back when you two were first married, Shannon mentioned something during one of our late-night conversations. She said that if her life ever fell apart completely, if she ever needed to disappear and rebuild herself from scratch, she would go to her grandmother's house in Sangre Grande. It's a small town in Trinidad and Tobago. Her grandmother Delilah still lives there. Shannon spent childhood summers there, learning to find peace in simplicity." Jeff felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, but hope's precursor. The possibility of possibility. "I don't know if Shannon actually went there," Tanya continued. I haven't heard from her in over a year. She cut off contact with everyone, including me, because she needed complete separation to heal. But that's the only destination she ever mentioned. The only place she described as home in a way that transcended geography. Why are you telling me this?" Because people deserve the opportunity to repair what they've destroyed, even if the repair only allows proper closure. Because I believe Shannon loved you deeply enough that she deserves to know whether you're capable of actual change or if you just learned to be lonely. And because, Tanya's voice finally broke slightly, because I watched you at Shannon's mother's funeral. You stood in the back where you thought nobody would notice, and you cried like you had lost someone you loved. Not performing for sympathy, actually grieving. And I thought maybe, just maybe, you've suffered enough to have learned something real. I was at the funeral. Jeff tried to remember, but the past months had blurred together. You were. You didn't approach anyone. You just stood there watching her coffin and you cried. I didn't tell Shannon you were there because I knew it would hurt her. But I remembered it, and it's part of why I'm here now. Tanya moved toward the door, then turned back. I'm not promising Shannon is in Trinidad. I'm not promising she'll want to see you if she is. I'm not even promising this information won't cause more harm than good. But it's all I have to offer. What you do with it is your decision. Tanya, Jeff's voice was rough.
Thank you.
I know that cost you. It did. Don't make me regret it. She left before Jeff could respond, and he stood alone in his doorway, holding the first thread of possibility he had felt since Shannon vanished. Sangre Grande. Trinidad and Tobago. Grandmother Delilah. The words repeated in his mind, like coordinates on a map he was terrified to follow. Jeff spent that night researching everything he could find about the town. It was small, rural, the kind of place people went to escape rather than be found. He looked at photographs online. Lush greenery, simple houses, roads that turned to dirt paths. It looked like peace, like exactly where someone would go to heal from wounds inflicted in places that valued noise over substance. By dawn, Jeff had made his decision. He booked a flight leaving that night, moving with speed born of fear that hesitation would reveal this as a terrible idea. He packed only essentials, clothes, toiletries, and the wooden box Shannon had left him. He wrote a letter to Shannon that he revised until the words felt honest rather than manipulative. He prepared to travel toward either redemption or final confirmation of permanent loss. At the airport, Jeff sat at his gate staring at his boarding pass, reality settling over him. What was he doing? Flying to another country, based on a childhood memory Shannon had mentioned years ago, showing up uninvited in a place where she had specifically gone to escape him. This wasn't romantic pursuit, this was borderline stalking. Shannon had left because she needed space from him, and here he was preparing to invade that space because he couldn't accept her boundary. Jeff pulled out his phone, staring at the contact information for his therapist. He could call her, explain the situation, get professional guidance about whether this was healthy pursuit or selfish desperation. But before he could dial, boarding began, and passengers started lining up, and Jeff found himself standing, moving forward, choosing action over analysis. The flight felt endless. Jeff sat by the window watching clouds that looked solid enough to walk on, thinking about Shannon moving through those same clouds years ago, traveling toward peace while he stayed behind in the wreckage he'd created. What had she felt during her own flight? Relief? Grief? Freedom mixed with sorrow? Or had she already moved beyond feelings that included him, already rebuilt herself into someone who no longer carried him anywhere inside her? Landing in Trinidad felt surreal. The air smelled different, humid and green, carrying scents Jeff couldn't name. He rented a car, purchased a local map because his phone's GPS was unreliable, and drove toward Sangre Grande with directions written on hotel stationery. The landscape changed as he left the airport area, buildings giving way to jungle, pavement transitioning to packed earth, civilization thinning until he felt like he was driving backward through time. He passed small houses with gardens overgrown in ways that looked deliberate rather than neglected, children playing in yards without fences, people sitting on porches watching the world with attention that wasn't waiting for entertainment. Grandmother Delilah's house sat at the end of a road that barely qualified as road. The structure was small but immaculate, painted bright yellow with blue shutters, surrounded by gardens that bloomed with aggressive color. Mango trees provided shade, their fruit heavy on branches that hung low enough to touch. The whole property radiated care and attention, the kind of place someone built over decades of patient investment. Jeff sat in his rental car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, fear making his body heavy. This was it, the moment where he discovered whether Shannon was here, whether she would speak to him, whether the man he had become was someone she could stand to be near. He had traveled thousands of miles on hope's fraying thread, and that thread was about to either hold or snap. He opened his car door. The humidity hit him immediately, thick and substantial. He walked toward the house, each step feeling both inevitable and insane, and knocked on a door that might open onto either possibility or emptiness. The woman who answered was ancient and ageless simultaneously, her face carrying decades while her eyes held centuries. She looked at Jeff with complete knowledge, as though she had been expecting him, as though his arrival was just one more expected event in a life full of predicted patterns. "You're Jeff Carson." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I'm looking for Shannon. I was told she might be here." "Come." Grandmother Delilah stepped onto her porch, closing the door behind her. "Sit. We need to talk before you see her. If you see her." Jeff sat in a chair that had been worn smooth by years of use, and Grandmother Delilah settled across from him, with tea she had somehow prepared without him noticing. "I knew you would come eventually. Some men take years to understand what they destroyed in minutes. You took 2, faster than most, slower than you should have. Is Shannon here?" "Ah, she's here. But here and available to you are different things." Delilah studied him with disturbing intensity. "My granddaughter arrived broken. Not damaged, broken, like someone had taken everything essential and shattered it, then expected her to keep functioning with pieces missing. She spent the first months barely speaking, moving through days like she was underwater. She gardened. She slept. She existed. That was all." Jeff felt tears building but fought them back. Eventually she started teaching at the local school, literacy, basic learning. She was patient with the children in ways she couldn't be with herself. Slowly, so slowly, she started rebuilding, not back into who she was, into someone new, someone stronger because she had survived breaking. Delilah sipped her tea. "She's happy now, genuinely happy. Content in ways she never was when she was with you, even when you two were good. I'm glad she's happy. Are you? Or are you glad she's here so you can attempt to put back together something that can't be reconstructed?" Delilah's voice held no cruelty, just directness. "Shannon is at the school right now. Down that road, maybe 10 minutes walking. You can see her. You can watch who she's become. But before you do, I need you to answer something honestly. Are you here for her benefit or your own?" The question hit Jeff like a physical blow because he didn't have an honest answer. He wanted to say he was here for Shannon, to give her whatever closure she needed. But wasn't he really here because he couldn't survive his own guilt? Because he needed her forgiveness to feel like he had paid adequate penance? "I don't know," Jeff said finally. "I want to say I'm here for her. But I think I'm probably here because I can't live with what I did unless she tells me I'm forgiven. Which means I'm here for me. Which means I shouldn't be here at all." Grandmother Delilah smiled slightly. "That's the first honest thing you've said. Honesty is progress." She stood, gesturing toward the road. "The school is that way. Shannon teaches until afternoon. Whether you disturb her peace is your decision. But make it carefully. Because some disturbances cause damage that takes years to repair, and she's already done that work once because of you." Jeff walked down the road, his heart beating so violently he could feel it in his throat. The school appeared around a bend, small, brightly painted, surrounded by children's laughter that sounded like wind chimes in the humid air. And there, under a massive tree heavy with red flowers, Shannon taught a circle of children, her voice carrying across the playground with warmth that made Jeff's chest hurt. She had changed. Not dramatically, she was still recognizably Shannon, but she moved with different confidence, laughed with different freedom, existed in space like she belonged there without question or qualification. Her hair was natural now, pulled back loosely. Her clothes were simple and bright. And when she laughed at something a child said, the sound was so pure, it hit Jeff like a weapon. He had destroyed this woman, and she had rebuilt herself into someone more powerful than who she had been before. And now he stood on the edge of her rebuilt life, preparing to risk that reconstruction for his own need for absolution. Jeff watched Shannon teach, watched her exist without him, and understood that love meant different things in different circumstances. Sometimes love meant pursuit. Sometimes love meant distance. Sometimes love meant standing in the background, watching someone thrive without you and choosing not to interfere because their peace mattered more than your need to be part of it. But before Jeff could decide what love required now, Shannon looked up during recess and saw him standing at the edge of the schoolyard. Their eyes met across distance measured in both feet and years, and Jeff watched her entire body freeze. Watched shock and something else, fear maybe, or anger, or just exhaustion, cross her face. She said something to the children, who immediately moved closer to her protectively, and Jeff realized Shannon had built a whole new community here that loved her enough to sense danger and respond. When the school day ended, Shannon finally approached him, not close, maintaining careful distance like he was something that might explode if she got too near. "Why are you here, Jeff?" The question was simple. The answer was impossible. Chapter 8. The Woman He No Longer Knows. Shannon stood 20 feet away from Jeff, maintaining distance that felt both protective and deliberate. The children from her class had scattered to their homes, but Jeff could see them watching from windows, behind trees, little guardians witnessing this confrontation. Shannon had built loyalty here, the kind that came from sustained care rather than performed kindness. "I came to find you," Jeff said, the words inadequate as soon as they left his mouth. "Obviously, that wasn't my question. I asked why you're here. What you want from this moment that justifies showing up uninvited in a place I came specifically to be away from you." Her voice had changed, not harsh but harder, carrying edges that hadn't existed before. Shannon used to speak softly even when upset, her natural inclination toward gentleness overriding anger. This Shannon had learned different lessons about self-protection. "I needed to see you, to talk to you." To what? Apologize? Explain? Ask forgiveness? Shannon's hands were steady at her sides, but Jeff could see tension in her shoulders. "Because if any of those are your intention, you should know they require my consent, and I haven't given that." "I know. You're right. I shouldn't have come without asking first, but I didn't have a way to reach you. That was intentional, Jeff. I removed myself from your reach because your reach had become harmful. And now you've traveled to another country to override a boundary I spent 2 years establishing. Do you understand how that looks from my perspective?" Jeff felt shame burning through him. "I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about boundaries. I was just thinking about finding you." "Yes, you were thinking about what you needed." "Like always." Shannon took a breath, visibly controlling herself. "You don't get to decide when I'm ready to face you. That's my decision, and showing up here removes that decision from me. Shannon, please, just give me 5 minutes to explain." "No." The single word landed final and absolute. "I've worked too hard to heal from what you did. I've built a life here that doesn't include you or the pain you caused. I've learned to sleep without nightmares where you tell me I'm not good enough. I've learned to look in mirrors without wondering what's wrong with me that made you ashamed. I've learned to exist without constantly questioning my worth." Her voice broke slightly. "And you showing up here threatens all of that because seeing you brings back everything I fought to leave behind. I'm not that person anymore. How would I know that? From your perspective, you've changed. From my perspective, you're someone who hurt me deeply and then showed up 2 years later expecting access to my life because your need for closure matters more than my need for peace." Jeff had no answer. Every word Shannon spoke was true. He had traveled here for himself, wrapped his selfishness in the language of love, and called it romantic when really it was just more evidence that he still prioritized his needs over her boundaries. "I'll leave." Jeff's voice came out rough. "You're right about everything. I shouldn't have come. I'm sorry for disturbing you." He turned to walk away, and Shannon's voice stopped him. "Wait." Jeff turned back. Shannon was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but her expression was angry rather than sad. "Do you know what you did to me? Really understand it?" Her voice was shaking. "You took every insecurity I ever had about not being enough and confirmed them. You looked at me, the woman who worked doubles to support your dreams, who documented your successes when you couldn't see them, who loved you when you had nothing but potential, and decided I was somehow insufficient for the life you were building. You treated my simplicity like shame, my contentment like failure, my love like burden. Shannon, I was wrong about everything. Let me finish." She stepped closer, closing some of the distance between them. "The night I left, I stood outside our apartment for 20 minutes, hoping you would wake up and stop me, that you would look outside and see me there and remember that you loved me enough to fight for us. But you didn't. You were passed out drunk from another dinner that meant nothing. And I cried on that bus until dawn, because I realized you had already left our marriage months before I physically walked away. I know I failed you in every possible way. You didn't just fail me. You taught me that my love wasn't valuable, that giving everything I had somehow made me less rather than more, that working to support someone else's dreams was admirable until those dreams came true, and then I became disposable." Shannon wiped her face roughly. "Do you understand how long it took me to unlearn those lessons? To rebuild my sense of worth? To trust that I wasn't the problem, you were? I was, completely. You were perfect, and I was too broken to see it. I wasn't perfect. Nobody is, but I was enough. I was always enough, and you convinced me I wasn't, and that's the cruelty I've been recovering from." Jeff wanted to move toward her, but knew better than to cross the space she was maintaining. "I came here hoping you could forgive me. But you're right, that's selfish. Your forgiveness isn't something I'm entitled to just because I finally understand what I destroyed. You want absolution." Shannon's voice had gone quiet again. "You want me to tell you that you're not the villain in this story, that your cruelty came from confusion rather than choice, that you can walk away from this conversation feeling like you've paid your debt. No, I mean, yes, maybe I do want that. But more than that, I want you to know that you were right about everything. About Damien poisoning my thinking. About success without love being empty. About me becoming someone unrecognizable. You tried to warn me, and I ignored you because other voices seemed louder. But yours was the only voice that ever told me truth." Shannon studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Knowing I was right doesn't comfort me, Jeff. It just confirms that I watched our marriage die while having perfect clarity about why and couldn't stop it anyway. What can I do to make this better, or at least less harmful? Leave. Go back to wherever you came from. Let me keep the peace I've built here." Shannon's voice was firm. "That's what you can do. Not for you, for me. Give me the gift of continuing to exist without you in my space." "Okay." Jeff felt his heart breaking again, fresh fracture over old scars. "I'll go. But Shannon, I need you to know that losing you was the worst thing I've ever done to myself. Not to you, to myself. Because you were the only real thing I ever had, and I traded you for performances and emptiness and the approval of people who would never care about me the way you did. I know you're suffering. I can see it." Shannon's expression softened slightly, though her position didn't change. "But your suffering doesn't erase mine. It just adds more pain to a situation that was already swimming in it. And I can't carry your pain on top of my own. I barely survived carrying my own." Jeff nodded, accepting the truth of her words. "I love you. I know I don't have the right to say that anymore, but it's true. I love who you were, who you are now, who you'll become. And I'll love you from distance if that's what you need. Don't! Shannon's voice was sharp. Don't make declarations that sound romantic, but are really just more ways of inserting yourself into my life. If you love me, prove it by respecting my boundary. Not by showing up uninvited. Not by making grand statements. By leaving me alone. You're right. Jeff turned to walk away, each step feeling like surrender. But Grandmother Delilah's voice stopped him from the road. Shannon, he's staying. Both Jeff and Shannon turned to find Delilah standing near her house, arms crossed, expression neutral but commanding. Grandma, no, Shannon started. Not for the reason you think. Not because he deserves access to you, but because running away from hard things is how we got here in the first place. Delilah moved closer. He came looking for you. That takes either courage or desperation, possibly both. You need closure. He needs understanding. These things don't happen through avoidance. I don't need closure. I have closure. I closed that door when I left Philadelphia. You closed a door, yes. But did you lock it? Or have you just been standing on the other side hoping nobody tests the handle? Delilah's voice was gentle but insistent. I'm not saying forgive him. I'm not even saying talk to him. But I am saying that healing requires facing what hurt you, not just running from it. I didn't run. I chose myself. You did. And that took strength. But there's different strength in standing still while difficult things approach, instead of always positioning yourself just beyond their reach. Delilah looked at Jeff. He stays. Not in my house. There's a cottage behind the property. He'll stay there. And you, she pointed at Shannon, will decide when and if you speak to him again. On your terms, your timeline. But you'll make that decision with him visible rather than hiding on another continent. Shannon looked at her grandmother with something between betrayal and understanding. You're forcing me to face him. I'm removing the option of avoidance, yes. Because avoidance is what he did to your marriage. He avoided hard conversations, avoided reality, avoided everything that challenged him. And you, in response, avoided him entirely. Sometimes the thing we need most is the thing we're running hardest from. Delilah walked away, leaving Shannon and Jeff standing in the road, the distance between them both impossible and insufficient. I hate that she's making you do this, Jeff said quietly. She's not making me do anything. She's creating circumstances where I have to actively choose my boundaries instead of hiding behind them. Shannon's expression was complex. That's different. Is there anything I can do? Any way I can make this less painful for you? Stop asking what you can do for me. That's not your role anymore. Your role is to exist in that cottage and leave me alone unless I decide otherwise. Shannon's voice was steady. If you actually love me the way you claim, you'll respect that without questioning or pushing. I will. I promise. Shannon nodded once, then walked away toward her grandmother's house, her posture straight and strong despite everything. Jeff watched her go, understanding that he had been given something, not forgiveness, but proximity to possibility. And proximity was more than he deserved. He found the cottage exactly where Delilah had indicated, small, simple, furnished with basics. It reminded him of his first apartment with Shannon, back when they had nothing but each other, and somehow that had been everything. Jeff unpacked his minimal belongings and sat on the cottage porch as sunset painted the sky impossible colors. Somewhere nearby, Shannon was existing in space he couldn't access, processing his sudden appearance, trying to maintain peace he had just threatened. He had traveled thousands of miles and found her, but finding her was the easy part. Now came the hard part, proving he was worth being found. Chapter 9. The Woman He No Longer Knows. Jeff woke the next morning to roosters announcing dawn, their calls unfamiliar and startling. The cottage felt foreign in daylight, clean but bare, functional rather than welcoming. He made coffee using a small electric kettle and sat on the porch, watching morning settle over Sangre Grande. The town was waking slowly, people walking to market, children being called to breakfast, the unhurried rhythm of a place where time moved differently than cities demanded. Grandmother Delilah appeared before Jeff finished his coffee, moving with energy that defied her age. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Jeff stood and followed her down a path that wound through her gardens, past vegetables growing in organized chaos, herbs that perfumed the air with scents he couldn't name, flowers blooming with aggressive color. Shannon wouldn't come out of her room this morning. Delilah didn't look at Jeff as she spoke. Her attention focused on pulling weeds from around tomato plants. "She's angry at me for letting you stay. Angry at you for coming. Angry at herself for caring enough to be angry. I can leave. I don't want to cause her more pain. Leaving solves nothing. Pain isn't something you run from. It's something you move through. You don't know that yet, but you will." Delilah straightened, fixing Jeff with a look that made him feel simultaneously exposed and understood. "Shannon ran from her pain when she came here. I let her because sometimes running is the first step toward healing. But eventually, running becomes hiding, and hiding becomes permanent avoidance. She needs to face you, not for your benefit, but for her own. What if facing me just reopens wounds that finally closed? Wounds that are avoided don't close. They just get covered over with scar tissue that's sensitive to touch." Delilah handed Jeff a basket. "Make yourself useful. Pick those mangoes, the high ones I can't reach." They worked in silence, Jeff climbing to gather fruit while Delilah harvested vegetables. The physical labor felt grounding, purposeful in ways his previous work had never been. There was honesty in gardening. You planted, tended, harvested. Cause and effect without performance. "Shannon teaches until midday, then helps at the community center," Delilah said as they walked back toward the house, their baskets full. "She has dinner with me most evenings. You're welcome to join us. She won't like it, but that's not the same as it being wrong." "I don't want to force myself into her space." "You already did that by coming here. Now you're here. Might as well be present honestly, rather than lurking at the edges, hoping for permission." Delilah took the mango basket from him. "Tonight, 7, don't bring gifts. Don't bring apologies. Just bring yourself and the willingness to be uncomfortable." That evening, Jeff approached Delilah's house with the wooden box tucked under his arm. Not as a gift, but as evidence, physical proof of what Shannon had left behind and what he had carried forward. He arrived at 7 exactly, knocked softly, and entered when Delilah called out. Shannon sat at the dinner table, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on her plate. She didn't look up when Jeff entered, didn't acknowledge his presence, except for the slight tightening of her jaw that suggested she was actively restraining herself. "Sit," Delilah commanded, pointing at the chair across from Shannon. "Eat. Nobody talks until after we've blessed the food and fed ourselves properly." The blessing was long and deliberate, asking for patience, wisdom, and the strength to face difficult truths with grace. Jeff kept his eyes closed, but he could feel Shannon's presence across from him, like heat from a fire, warm and dangerous simultaneously. They ate in silence that felt heavy, but not hostile. The food was simple and perfect. Rice and peas, stewed chicken, vegetables that tasted like they had been picked that morning, because they had been. Jeff ate mechanically, not tasting anything, hyper-aware of every small sound Shannon made, her fork touching her plate, her water glass being lifted and lowered, her breathing that seemed carefully controlled. "Jeff brought something," Delilah said finally, breaking the silence. "Show her." Jeff placed the wooden box on the table between them. Shannon looked at it and her expression cracked slightly, pain flashing across her face before she controlled it again. "You kept it." Her voice was barely audible. "I've carried it everywhere since you left. It's been on my nightstand, in my car, in my pocket. I read your letter so many times the paper is falling apart." Jeff didn't open the box. "This box has been the only real thing in my life for 2 years. Why?" Shannon finally looked at him directly, and her eyes were full of tears she refused to let fall. "Why keep evidence of what you destroyed? Why carry reminders of the person you decided wasn't good enough?" "Because you were always good enough. I was the one who wasn't, And keeping this box was my only way of remembering that I had something perfect, and threw it away for nothing. For nothing. Shannon's voice rose slightly. You threw me away for your career, for status, for the approval of people who mattered more to you than I did. That's not nothing, that's a choice. You chose them over me. I chose wrong. Yes, you did. And knowing that now doesn't erase the year I spent being systematically dismissed and devalued and treated like an embarrassment. Delilah stood, collecting plates. I'm going to wash these outside. You two keep talking or sit in silence. Either way, you're staying at this table until something gets resolved. She left, and Jeff and Shannon sat alone with the wooden box between them, like a border neither could cross. Can I ask you something? Jeff said quietly. You're going to anyway. When did you decide to leave? What specific moment made you realize you couldn't stay? Shannon was silent for a long time, her fingers tracing the wood grain of the table. Our anniversary, the one you missed for a work dinner. I sat in that apartment wearing my best dress, watching candles burn down, waiting for you to remember that the day mattered. And when you finally came home, drunk and defensive, I realized you had already left our marriage. You just hadn't moved out yet. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I don't need your apologies. They changed nothing. Shannon finally looked at him again. Do you know what I did after you fell asleep that night? I sat on our balcony looking at old photos, trying to find the moment when you stopped seeing me as essential and started seeing me as optional. And I couldn't find it. It wasn't one moment. It was accumulation. Small dismissals piling up until they became a wall between us. Damien, don't blame him. He just said out loud what you were already thinking. He just gave you permission to act on feelings you were too cowardly to own yourself. Shannon's voice was sharp. You're the one who looked at me and decided I wasn't sophisticated enough. You're the one who suggested I stay home from events. You're the one who made me feel like my love was burden rather than gift. Damien might have influenced you, but you made every choice. You're right. About all of it, Jeff felt tears building, but didn't try to stop them. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too insecure to recognize its value. I let someone poison my thinking because the poison felt like validation. And I hurt you in ways that can't be repaired because I was trying to become someone I thought was better than who I actually was. Do you know what the worst part is? Shannon's voice broke finally, tears spilling over. I still loved you even after you stopped loving me. I loved you while you were killing us. I loved you when I packed my bags. I loved you on that bus, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I loved you for months after I left, hoping you would find me, hoping you would fight for us. She wiped her face roughly. And you didn't. You just let me go. Like I was easy to lose? You were never easy to lose. Losing you was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. But you didn't fight it. You didn't come looking for me. You just accepted the loss and moved on. I didn't move on. I've been stuck in the moment you left for 2 years. I haven't moved forward at all. I've just existed in the same space, frozen, unable to function without you. Shannon laughed, but it was bitter. So you were fine letting me suffer alone, but now that you've suffered, you decided to find me. Now that being alone hurts you, you came looking for relief? Yes. Jeff's honesty seemed to surprise her. Yes, that's exactly what I did. And it's selfish and wrong, and you have every right to send me away. But I needed you to know that I understand what I lost. That I understand you were the only thing that ever truly mattered. That every success I've had means nothing because the person I wanted to share it with isn't there. That's not my problem anymore. Jeff, your loneliness isn't something I'm responsible for fixing. I spent years trying to fix things for you, and all it got me was broken. They sat in silence as darkness deepened outside, the wooden box still between them, neither of them willing to open it or move it aside. What do you want from me? Shannon asked finally, exhaustion replacing anger in her voice. Seriously, what outcome are you hoping for from this conversation? I want you to know you were right. About everything. I want you to hear me admit that I failed you completely. And I want, Jeff paused, trying to find honesty. I want you to forgive me. Not for my sake, though I'd be lying if I said it wasn't partially selfish. but for your sake too, because I think you're still carrying anger that's weighing you down, and I want to release you from having to carry it. You don't get to decide when I'm released from anger. That's mine to carry or put down as I choose. You're right. I'm sorry. Shannon stood abruptly, pushing back from the table. I can't do this anymore tonight. I'm exhausted, and you're exhausting me more. She moved toward the door, then turned back. Tomorrow my grandmother is going to tell you that you need to work in the community. Help repair things, teach people, integrate yourself here. And she's going to make it sound like a test, like you proving something. But really, she's just trying to keep you busy so I can figure out how I feel about you being here without constant confrontation. Okay. Don't misunderstand. This isn't me giving you hope. This is me trying to survive your presence without falling apart. There's a difference. Shannon left, and Jeff sat alone at Delilah's table with the wooden box, understanding that he had hurt Shannon in ways that couldn't be healed through conversation or apology. Some damage was permanent. Some things, once broken, stayed broken no matter how carefully you tried to piece them back together. But maybe broken things could still be beautiful. Maybe fractures could become part of the pattern rather than evidence of failure. Or maybe he was just telling himself comfortable lies because accepting that Shannon might never forgive him was too painful to face. Delilah returned, saw Jeff still sitting there, and nodded approvingly. Tomorrow morning, early, you start working. I'll show you what needs doing. And Jeff? She fixed him with that look that saw through performance to truth. Shannon's grandmother stood in the door watching you two talk. That girl hasn't cried like that in a year. You reopen something? Whether it heals or festers depends on what you do next. What should I do? Prove you've changed. Not through words, through consistent action over time. That's the only thing that matters now. Not grand gestures, not dramatic apologies. Just showing up every day and being different than who you were. Jeff nodded, understanding that his real test wasn't finding Shannon. It was proving to her day after day that the man who hurt her no longer existed. And that test had only just begun. Chapter 10. The 3 Tests of Love. Grandmother Delilah woke Jeff before sunrise with 3 sharp knocks. He found her on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee waiting. Shannon won't see you. She asked me to tell you that your presence causes her pain, and she requests you leave. Delilah handed him coffee. I told her I'm not asking you to leave. Not yet. If she wants me gone, what Shannon wants and what she needs aren't always the same. I'm offering you an opportunity. 3 conditions that might convince Shannon to speak with you again. Delilah's expression was grave. But fulfilling these doesn't guarantee forgiveness or reconciliation. Only consideration. I'll do whatever you ask. First condition, you stay 3 months. Living here, working in this community as Shannon has. Teaching business basics to local entrepreneurs. Helping repair buildings. Participating without status or recognition. You prove the man who valued appearance has learned where meaning actually lives. Jeff nodded, releasing his practice. His life back home. Second condition, you write Shannon a letter each week, explaining what you've learned about yourself through destroying your marriage. Honest to the point of pain, without manipulation. I read each one first. Any emotional coercion means immediate departure. And the third? You must accept that even fulfilling everything perfectly, Shannon may choose forgiveness without reconciliation. You must leave with grace if that's her decision. These aren't punishments, they're doorways. If you pass through authentically, you become someone capable of receiving what Shannon once offered. I accept. All 3 conditions. Then we start now. The months dissolved into patterns Jeff had never known. Dawn wakings, physical labor, exhausted sleep. He helped restructure a woman's restaurant inventory, taught a young carpenter basic accounting, advised farmers on distribution. The gratitude was immediate and real. Your system saved me 3 hours weekly. My business feeds my family now. He repaired roofs, fixed foundations, cleared debris. His body ached constantly those first weeks, learning manual labor again. Men who'd worked their whole lives taught him with patient correction, showing proper technique without judgment. The weekly letters became archaeological excavations. He detailed how Damien had fed childhood insecurities, the fear he wasn't truly good enough, that people would eventually see through him. How those fears made him believe Shannon's contentment reflected poorly on his ambition, rather than beautifully on her character. Each letter peeled back more. How he'd equated wealth with worth, confused performance for authenticity, mistaken approval for value. He wrote about realizing Shannon's love had been most valuable when he'd already destroyed it. Delilah rejected 3 letters, demanding more honesty. "You're still protecting yourself. Strip away the coating. Show the wound underneath." Shannon never responded. Jeff learned to express truth without requiring acknowledgement, to offer transparency without demanding response. The community began recognizing Jeff as a contributor. Parents thanked him for helping their school fundraiser. The restaurant owner brought him dinner, insisting he looked too thin. The farmers invited him to their harvest celebration. He met Amara, a young girl who reminded him of Shannon, quick smile, hungry mind. Her father had left. Her mother worked multiple jobs. "Are you Shannon's husband?" she asked. "I was. I'm not sure what I am now. She says you were confused about what mattered." "Are you still confused?" Jeff considered seriously. Less confused than before. But learning what matters takes time. Shannon says important lessons take longest because they require unlearning wrong things first. Jeff tutored Amara weekly in mathematics, never mentioning the connection to Shannon, though he understood it fully. Teaching her reminded him why he'd started his work, not for status, but because helping someone understand felt meaningful in ways money never could. 3 months passed. Jeff integrated completely, his presence becoming unremarkable. He attended Friday gatherings, learned names and family connections, discovered Shannon taught adult literacy in evening classes. He never saw Shannon. She carefully avoided his spaces, but he felt her influence everywhere, in students who quoted Miss Shannon, and in community members who referenced her work, in the careful way people mentioned her around him. His final letter shifted from excavating failures to documenting transformation. "I can't promise I've changed completely. I can only promise I understand what I lost and why. Your love was the most authentic thing I ever experienced, and I treated authenticity like burden. If given another chance, I would prove daily through action that I remembered these lessons. But I understand you may never give that chance, and your healing doesn't require my redemption. Love sometimes means stepping back and allowing someone to thrive without you." Delilah read it twice, then nodded. "This one is ready, but being ready to give her this doesn't mean she's ready to receive it." The morning his 3 months ended, Jeff found Delilah on her porch. Beside her sat Shannon. "Sit," Delilah commanded. Shannon held his letters, pages worn from multiple readings. When she met his eyes, her expression was complicated and unreadable. "I read every letter, some multiple times. Some I had to put down because they hurt too much." Shannon's hands trembled slightly. "You wrote about things I thought you'd never understand. How external validation poisoned everything. How you confused performance with substance. How you treated my love like burden when it was the most valuable thing you had." Jeff remained silent. "I've been watching you these months through other people. Through Amara, who talks constantly about your math lessons. Through farmers who say you saved their cooperative. Through people who tell me you show up daily without seeking credit or making everything about yourself." Shannon pulled the wooden box toward her. The one Jeff had. Carried through 2 years and 3 months. This box was supposed to be a funeral. But you carried it like it was still alive, like these memories had weight despite everything. She opened it, touching each item carefully. "Grandmother gave you 3 tests. You fulfilled them. But I have my own test. Anything. That's the test, not anything. The test is whether you understand that my healing doesn't require your presence, that I've built a complete life here without you, That I'm genuinely happy alone in ways I never was, even during our best times together. Shannon's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. Can you accept that I don't need you to be whole? Jeff felt understanding crystallize painfully. Yes, you don't need me. You never needed me. You chose me. And I was too stupid to understand the difference. Need is about filling gaps. Choice is about adding to what's already complete. Shannon was crying now. I loved you when you had nothing. I loved you through every failure. And you decided that love wasn't sophisticated enough. I traded something real for something hollow. I damaged the only person who saw me clearly and loved me anyway. Shannon stood, moving to the railing, her back to him. I want to forgive you. I want to believe you've changed. But I'm terrified of believing again and discovering you were performing. Of surviving this heartbreak twice. You don't know the future. I can't prove it. I can only show you the present and hope it's evidence enough. I'm asking for the chance to prove over time, through consistent action, that I've learned what matters. If we do this, if I give you another chance, I'm not who I was. I'm harder, less willing to sacrifice myself, more protective of my peace. I won't work myself to exhaustion, supporting your dreams while you forget mine. I won't make myself smaller so you feel bigger. I don't want you to be who you were before. Who you've become is stronger, and I don't want you to diminish that for anyone. Jeff's voice was steady. I'm asking if we can build something entirely new, where we choose each other daily instead of taking each other for granted. Delilah spoke quietly. This man has changed. Not perfectly, no one does, but fundamentally. Whether that's enough is yours to decide. Shannon pulled a seed from her pocket, dried and preserved. This is from the flamboyant tree where I teach. These trees grow from impossible circumstances. They thrive in poor soil, survive hurricanes, bloom despite conditions that would kill others. She placed the seed in the wooden box among their old memories. Some things die and stay dead. Some become compost for new growth, figuring out which requires time and brutal honesty. Shannon looked directly at him. I'm not saying yes. I'm saying maybe. I'm saying we can try, slowly, carefully, with complete honesty at every step. That's more than I deserve. It's not about what you deserve. It's about what I'm willing to risk. Shannon moved closer. But Jeff, if you hurt me again, if you start valuing external approval over our connection, I'm gone. No second chances after the second chance. I promise, not perfection because I'll fail sometimes. But I promise I'll never again prioritize others' opinions over your worth. I'll never again take for granted that your presence is the greatest fortune I'll ever receive. Shannon took his hand, the first voluntary touch since he arrived. Her fingers were warm and trembling. We stay here 6 more months, building this slowly, learning each other as the people we've become. We practice honesty even when uncomfortable. And at the end, we decide together whether this is real or just nostalgia. 6 months, yes. She handed him the wooden box. This seed needs difficult soil to grow properly. Too much comfort produces weak roots. They stood together on Delilah's porch, holding a box that contained both history and potential future. The distance between them was smaller, but still present, still necessary. 6 months wasn't long. But it was enough time to discover whether murdered love could resurrect into something that thrived. Standing there, neither certain but both willing to risk trying, they understood that uncertainty was the point. Love without risk was just comfortable predictability. Real love required choosing someone even when failure was possible, even when rebuilding was harder than starting fresh. The wooden box sat between them. No longer a funeral, but a garden. Some seeds died in that box, but some were waiting for the right conditions to bloom. And sometimes the right conditions included breaking, grieving, learning, and choosing to try again, despite every reason not to. The wooden box sits between them now, no longer a catalogue of what was lost, but a living archive of what can be rebuilt. Some gifts break your heart, Others give you the chance to build it back stronger. Shannon's last gift did both.